Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Tom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey, and welcome back to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on the journey of this show that was designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Tom Singer, and I have the honor to be the co-host of this show, along with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm great, Tom. The weather has moderated. It's getting nicer. That's why I live in Michigan. So it's good to hear your voice.
Well, in Texas, it's about 100 degrees and humid. So I'm not having that moderated summer weather that you have around the Great Lakes.
You're having the Texas weather.
Yeah, I could take a little bit cooler weather for sure.
I'm sure.
So each week, Craig and I try to bring to this podcast interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help all of our listeners enhance and grow their careers. And today is going to be one of those days. Today, we are talking with Samantha Ziesel, and she was the group director of Voice of the Customer for a tier one company that focused on aerospace and energy. And she is with us today, and we are going to find out sort of some advice, a little bit about her life. So Samantha, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. So can you tell us a little bit about your background? Where did you get started and sort of where did your career go?
Absolutely. So actually, you can probably tell, possibly slightly from the accent, that I don't belong on this side of the pond, or perhaps don't come from this side of the pond. But I started my career in the UK. And in fact, my first focus was in fact in a very different area. It was in dance. But unfortunately, owing to an injury, I had to take a very quick career change and go down a completely different path. But I was very fortunate to end up in a company which was actually a very large global telecommunications company, right at the point when the telecoms industry was in the starting point of deregulation. So this afforded me a great opportunity to unearth a skill that I didn't really realize was within me, which was understanding the customer and being holistically customer-centric. So I started my journey with this company in the UK, and ironically, I was transitioned to the United States to set up a global voice of the customer services infrastructure for this global telecommunications company, based upon the success I had in the first implementation phase one in the UK. So ironically, a Brit was transferred to the US to implement a customer services infrastructure. So that's where my career started to take off. And it was really fortuitous for me because I started in the strategy, sales and marketing division, and I would accompany the sales and marketing guys to customer meetings. And what I was finding is that the core culture of the company at that point in time was very much based upon, shall we say, more ego-based. So it was very much kind of the customer needs us more than we need the customer. But as the telecommunications market changed rapidly with decentralization, it became very apparent that they needed to culturally change very quickly if they wanted to retain their customer base. So that's where I applied just some very, what I thought were logical principles of listening to the customer, letting them tell you exactly how they feel about their experience with you, the supplier, and then taking that customer information back into the organization and starting to build avenues to analyze that data and disseminate that data into those core continuous improvement activities. So that's what we basically were able to do. And it was very successful. I was with that company for over 12 years. And then I was actually headhunted to join Crane Aerospace and Electronics in the United States. And they were at the early stages of VoC. And it was great for me because that role was much bigger and much more complex. So I kind of hit the ground running. I had to learn very, very quickly about aerospace and the core of aerospace. And it's quite a complex industry, but thoroughly enjoyed it. And I was able to very successfully help them in their journey to become a much more customer-centric organization. And I worked across many disciplines there, so product support, field service engineering, and technical publications. So they were all under my responsibility, as well as developing a voice of the customer. So from there, I moved into my most recent role, which was group director of a tier 1 aerospace company, again, internationally based, with headquarters in the US, but the central PLC headquarters in the UK. So I spent the last 9.5 years helping them build customer centricity into their core culture and their core directional strategy. And I did such a great job of that, that they're now very much aligned with their customer thought process, and they're strategically aligned on the development and growth as they move forward.
You know, Sam, it's interesting. We were talking a little before we started about especially the commercial aerospace world and the challenges it's facing. You know, before we get to that topic, could you help our audience? We got a lot of engineers, a lot of mechanical folks, and they sometimes know what voice to the customer is, but a lot of times they don't. Can you describe for us, you know, a formal definition of voice to the customer and how you know you're doing it right?
Yeah, absolutely. So in essence, the voice of the customer is a business and technology term used to describe a process that aims to capture your customer's expectations, preferences, experience. So ultimately, their feedback of how things are, basically working with you as their supplier. So it is in the customer's language and it's prioritized by the customer, but it gives you absolute insight and removes the perception and gives you reality. So it lines external VoC, as we call it, with your internal perception. So it's often applied as a market research technique, and that's, you know, often by firms looking to achieve a better and more complete understanding of the customer. And it can also help companies measure and understand experiences that they deliver to their customers through different disciplines within their business.
Interesting. So I learned about voice of the customer from an engineering peer. She retired about the same time I did from GM, but she was an engineer by training, but she went into market research and voice of the customer because she was very good at it. She could bridge this gap between engineering and market research. Is that one of the problems? Is that engineers just don't get the lingo or don't get the process?
I think they don't often think about the importance of sharing that data back into an organization. And I think you have to have the mindset of understanding the importance of every engagement with your customer. So often you'll see information being contained within pockets within a business, so siloed effectively. So it never makes its way into the core of the business where it can be utilized effectively.
That's,
so I think,
yeah, you mentioned silos. That's a common topic on this podcast. Now, the fact that even with just engineering, the different domains of engineering operate in their own silos, right? So other things like market research or voice of the customer matter. So let's do a little bit of a role play. So it's February, and I'm getting ready. This is my experience. I was getting ready to fly to Japan to give a speech or two, and then do something similar in Germany. And all heck breaks loose, and we're not flying anywhere. Before, I wanted a comfortable seat and possibly a drink, and I wanted to get there so that I could rest overnight as I flew halfway around the world. Now, I don't even want to get on an airplane. So my voice of the customer for flying has changed dramatically to, I'm 62, I don't know that I want to fly, but I got to get there to give the speech whenever we open up again and start talking after this pandemic's over. So how would you capture my changing attitude, my changing voice, and how would you make sure the company understood it, so whether they're a tier one or an aircraft company, they could make adjustments?
Well, it's really important that you understand that VoC is not a pinpoint in time. It's a continuous evolving journey, so to speak. So you have to find a way to solicit customer feedback and manage it real time. So there's a lot of companies that have some really great tools and processes, but if they are not managing and monitoring and have a capability to immediately know when that data hits their business so that they can take prompt action to analyze, deduce, and take action on that data, they're going to lose opportunities. And not only are they going to lose opportunities, but they're going to effectively have an experience where VoC becomes a negative experience for the business. Mm-hmm. So the VoC is there, you're not taking appropriate action. So instead of seeing it as an opportunity to improve, it actually is damaging. It becomes a negative experience. So the customer's offering their feedback, but you're not listening.
Well, you just hit on why General Motors got ahead of Ford some, whatever it was, 80 years ago, right? Henry Ford said everybody would like a Model T, and you can have whatever color you want as long as it's black. And the guys running General Motors came along and said, yeah, and we're going to go listen to the customer. We'll put chrome on it. We'll paint it different colors. We'll consolidate different car companies. The rest is kind of industrial history, right? And what I found interesting as I got to know, I come up through engineering, right? But I had to deal more and more with market research as we were doing product lifecycle management tools. And part of the challenge was, I really like what you said, it's a continuous process, right? So you got to integrate the market research processes with the product development processes. And you need to ask throughout product development, well, the thing we started out 18 months ago, is it still, are these key factors still the relevant factors to the customer, or did something change? And that's where market research becomes a continuous activity. It has to keep going on. And when it changes, the company has to be agile enough to make a change,
Absolutely.
Right? In the case of aircrafts, it's got to be something about safety, not just crash safety, but safety around the air quality. And, part of it's who you let on the plane, but another part of it's going to be even if you let, 50% of the traffic on the plane, you still got to figure out, people that are going to be with each other for an 8-hour flight. That's a real risk. You got to manage it right now. So interesting.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, an effective VoC program can help a business in so many different ways. I mean, a lot of people look at VoC as, you send a survey out and you're good, bad, or ugly. What do you do with it? But it is so much more than that. I mean, it can measure, improve a customer experience. It can help a business customize their products and services so that they can respond to the needs and wants of their customers, and also, become leading edge in the industry. So it opens them up to potentially new opportunities with new customers. Mm-hmm. I mean, absolutely. It's going to help you to understand your points of failure in the business. How are you performing as viewed through the eyes of the customer? Not your internally perception-based performance. So really, are you performing to the customer needs, expectations, even down to, do you have a contract in place? Are you meeting your contractual terms? So it can drive your customer satisfaction and loyalty, as well as, I mean, it's going to be a cost-saving element for the business. So there's not going to be financial penalties for underperformance, for an example. It can help a business prioritize high-impact customer issues. You can do your trends, and you can look at where you have systemic issues in the business.
Now,
and definitely,
you mentioned something that maybe we should dive into a little bit about customer. Now,
sure.
There's like a car customer, so you and I buying a car, and then there's a customer like an aircraft manufacturer buying a seat that goes in an aircraft. They are motivated by different things, right? Now, the aircraft manufacturer wants that seat to be comfortable to you and I as consumers, but there's even another party called the airline, right? So it's a bit more convoluted, right? And so I wanted to dive in a bit about, who is the customer? I used to always say, well, the customer is the one spending money, whichever one's willing to buy it. In the case of a car company, that's kind of easy, right? In the case of an aircraft, it's a little more difficult, right? And it's not as obvious to me. So have you guys, do you have a way of talking about who's a customer and who's a partner, or who's a customer and who's a supplier?
Absolutely. And you can have internal and external customers as well as tiered customers. I mean, ultimately, if you know your business and you know your customers, you know what the end product is going to be. So you could, for example, have ball screws that are going to go into a component on an aircraft, and they could go through, you could be tier 3 or tier 2 on the supply chain. But if you don't deliver that product, no matter how small or insignificant you think it is to your business, it may be just a small piece of the pie, it could have a major impact on the end result. So looking at the bigger picture is definitely what a company should do. If you're too, insular in your view, and you don't understand how, your business, leverages and engages and interacts with the bigger picture, then you really could shortchange yourself. I mean, I've had experiences in the past where, let's put it this way, a very large airframer has no shame to bypass their first tier to go to the second tier if you're not performing and aligning to your direct customer. Let's put it that way. So it depends a lot on
the start of vertical integration, even if they shouldn't, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, it's in your interest to really understand how you fit in the jigsaw puzzle. Because at some point in time, that role could change. So what was a tier 2 could be a tier 1.
This point is made differently for systems engineering and systems thinking, but it really is the same principle. And it's you need to know where you fit into this bigger picture, as you put it. We used to have a leader, a lot of us worked for 20 years ago. And his comment always was, if you don't know what the interface is 2 interfaces away, so not just your part, but the part you're mated to and the part it's mated to, then you weren't doing a good job of systems engineering. It's the bigger picture, right? So in design for Six Sigma, one of the things that people use is a house of quality, right? A house of quality is all about benchmarking, voice of the customer, and coupled requirements, figuring out which requirements impact each other, right? So it's interesting to me, you talk about the bigger picture. In your comments to me, you mentioned there are pitfalls with working with digital data. Why is that?
People can become very, shall we say, used to relying on that interface. So they lose the human-to-human aspect of relationships. Now, we understand there's the new world, so to speak, that we're in currently, and that is driving companies to change the way they communicate, individuals to change the way they communicate. And it's very much key in the environment of digital and how that plays a role in fundamentals such as voice of the customer. So it's very easy to establish a well-oiled machine and allow it to do what it does. And it's gathering in your customer data, even to the point of going through analytics and spitting it out into report format. but you cannot lose sight of the human element. There's the human element behind the functions, and you have to absolutely make sure that you stay engaged with the customer. So you need to understand, for example, getting customer feedback back. Don't believe that you can interpret the tone of that feedback. It's a little bit like a text message, right? It could get lost in the translation. You need
That's
to
a
make
good example.
sure.
Yeah,
that,
right. How do you know how do you know the emotion?
Absolutely.
Right?
Exactly. Absolutely. So, to me, it's a good stepping stone to open that dialogue so that you have that human-to-human interaction. And again, you could do that digitally. I mean, people use video conferencing. You can have conference calls, a telephone call, but don't lose that link with your customer. Don't lose that personal touch, that human element. And then, of course, again, data. I mean, we're very dependent on the data, but make sure that you also have a process of managing that data. So if I was looking at performance data in the aerospace industry and all of the customers are going to provide some form of a way to measure your performance to their terms, make sure that you have the capability and the human element there to validate that data first and foremost. And you'll see a lot of very intricate, advanced systems and tools where you can contest data at a customer level. But what happens when there's a problem, when you don't agree with what's coming back at you from a system or tool? So, you've got to have that human engagement. You've got to have, and you should always maintain that. So it's very important that you don't hide behind the success you're having in the digital arena.
There's all kinds of examples in our world, and I'm thinking of the 2016 elections. and I don't want to make this political, but I do want to point out that this is one of the best examples, not product engineering related, about where we the people that were studying all the data were making all these predictions based upon what the data was telling them, and they did lose that human connection. This part of our society that chose to vote the other way, and by the time they figured it out, the election was over, right? And so Nate Silver does a lot of work. I think it's his company's 528, but they do a lot of predictions, and they were very good up until the 2016 election. And then he wrote a book about what happened, right? How come we got it so wrong? And then his book's got a catchy title, but it's something about it's still worth doing because sometimes it gives you insight you don't otherwise have, this data modeling. But if you only work with data, I like the way you summarized it, that can't be your process. It's just, you've got to augment that process with a human feedback loop somehow, right?
Absolutely.
So interesting. And the car companies, the good ones, we all do this, right? We're asking you, how's the first 30 days have been and how's the first 3 years have been, right? And there are people like JD Power that do this for a living. So to all of you out there wondering, well, is voice of the customer really needed? The answer emphatically is yes. and you can really tell. I mean, the preeminent high-tech company that does this really well is Apple. They exceed at it, and you go back to Steve Jobs, you'll hear about voice of the customer and why it's so important. Now, there's one other area I'd like to explore a little bit that you mentioned in your notes to me about flexibility. And I want to talk about flexibility for company success. So we have all these challenges upon us with the pandemic. We have products in the pipe, whether it's a new car or we were going to, the Uber world, we're going to shared use, right? Well, that's probably not going to work in this current pandemic phase. But my point is one thing that people need to design, engineers need to look for, is flexible architectures, flexible product lines. And what drives the basis for the flexibility is voice of the customer. And so in your experience, have there been people that get it right without telling us anybody's secret about, well, are there architectural reviews for voice of the customer, if I could say it that way, that just say, how flexible is this architecture to support a changing voice of the customer or something like that? What's your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think companies still struggle to do that effectively, especially companies that grow through acquisition. So they have a headquartered central core, and then they have their individual divisions, product lines, however the company is structured. You need to make sure that you have internal VOC as well as your external VOC. So you're bringing your external VOC and your internal VOC into a point where you are really utilizing that data to understand, almost like an internal SWOT. So you're looking at your business and you're looking at your future growth potential. So the VOC insights are shared with the key stakeholders and the decision makers, but also with the workforce that are going to be utilizing the product or the output, so that you really understand the closest touch point to the customer from an internal perspective if you're heading in the right direction. I see so many companies that are what I would call product in rather than product out rather than market in companies, because they are not truly utilizing the data that is accessible to them.
Well, you should be happy with a black Model T, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. Exactly. Right there, you have it. So I think it's so important that a company has to kind of check their ego at the door, and they have to be ready to embrace perhaps information that not necessarily is good news at the forefront, but in fact is a great opportunity. And they need to understand how they can translate that into a quantifiable strategic win on the front end. And then share that with the customer. Right?
Yeah, really well said. The people... I'm thinking about the gig society at the moment, right? So not temporary workers or freelance workers. I don't mean that, though. Those folks should do voice of the customer. But these folks like Uber and Lyft and so shared use, so sharing a car or sharing something, right? They need to now know that a customer's one of their top interests, at least for the next few years until a vaccine is put everywhere. Safety all of a sudden outranks ease of use or ease of availability, right? And I don't know, I don't have the data in my hands, but I don't know where safety fits rather to affordability, because people can probably afford less too, right? But talk about turning your business upside down. I can't even imagine, right? And so I think the ones that succeed will do what you just said. They'll turn around and say, okay, well, what opportunities does this bring us, right? We do know how, like, for instance, what do they know how to do? Well, they know how to manage a fleet. Okay, well, could they manage a fleet of safe things, right? Of secure things, secure in the sense of people won't catch a disease, right? So,
absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Sam, I think what you do is really important, this voice of the customer and the practices around it. And I get a chance to talk with companies about their processes and mostly engineering, because that's where I come from. But it's always interesting as I bring in market research, they're like, I have to pay attention to that. And I said, you not only have to pay attention to it, you have to keep checking with them throughout the whole process. and so it's nice to find a person who understands this and also can talk about it well. And I encourage you to keep talking with groups, especially engineers. They need to appreciate this flexible for growth, flexibility for the pandemic and dealing with it. So with that, Thom, got any last points?
Yeah. So as I listen to this, I get kind of excited about this whole role that you assumed inside of companies in this voice of the customer. So if someone else is listening to this and they're like, oh yeah, that's where I should be working, How do people even transition into that type of a job?
That's a great question. I think that, first of all, you need to understand that it's not going to be an easy job, any stretch of the imagination. I think that if you have a focus in program management, if you have a focus in contracts management, basic customer services, any of those arenas would be strong candidates for VoC. But really, any business function should have an element of VoC attached to it. So you could actually, the role that you currently hold, look at a way that you can improve the direction of the company in the most cost-effective and time-sensitive manner by understanding what's working well, what's not working well, and how potentially you can improve your business model. And the best way to do that is to ask your customers. So even by having general, informal discussions to a point, where if you've got a good relationship and bringing that into the business, you can actually expand your role and add greater value to the business by simply offering up solutions based upon your customer's experience. But I would say, you have to know that it's going to be a difficult environment to work with, because not everybody welcomes feedback with open arms. And if the feedback is not aligned with, let's say, a culture or a mindset, then there can be tremendous resistance to incorporate that feedback in the way that business grows or is conducted. So you've got to kind of have a tough exterior, but it can be extremely rewarding. So if you like to fix problems and you like to put a smile on somebody's face, then it's a great career to go look into for sure. And you're going to see more and more of these roles developing now because of the current environment we're in.
So that was the experience of the person I mentioned who was an engineer at GM. That's exactly what she did, was what you described. She went a bit further than her assigned job and then started bringing customer testimonials. It was JD Power feedback and saying, we're not addressing this. And she's an engineer, so she had the basis to challenge engineers, right? But you got to have the passion, and then you got to work for the right company. In retirement, you get to sit here and look from on high a little bit and reflect. And I would tell you, if you're earlier in your career and you're in one of those cultures that doesn't want feedback, figure out another place. There's a lot of places that have the right culture, and usually you can tell based on the bottom line, especially this kind of environment we're in now with the pandemic. If they survived the pandemic, it's one of those places because they were flexible, because they could deal with the challenges that got hit with them. If you're at a place they just don't want to hear it, well, and you find it's your passion, you're right, Sam. There's lots of people that are going to want this.
Absolutely. I mean, it is the way forward. I mean, it is sustainability for any company. If you don't have intentional customer experience, whatever you want to call it, customer satisfaction, as one of your key core goals, you're not going to make it.
Well, Samantha Ziesel, thank you so much for joining us here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. We appreciate you.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure. And
thanks to everybody who tuned in and listened. Hey, join us every single week for more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.